Hello, everyone. We are going to have the best discussion today. Check it out. We've got Brian Vo, the VP of Social Investment and Innovative Finance for Pact. He's also the head of Pact Ventures. So if you're a social entrepreneur interested in capital, if you're a human being interested in seeing the world change, you want to watch this episode. So stick around.
Welcome to the Your Mark on the World show with your champion of social good, Devin D. Thorpe.
This episode is made possible via the support of our sponsors, including Johnson & Johnson's Caring Crowd. Brian, welcome to the show.
Hi, Devin. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. Thank you for joining us. We're so excited to have this conversation. Pact is a huge organization with a long history and a tremendous, impact. $200 million in revenue last year and huge projects all around the world, 5,000 employees. The organization is a big deal. You're a big deal in the organization, and you're leading something really innovative. Tell us a little bit about Pact and Pact Ventures, how Pact Ventures fits into the Pact picture.
Yeah, absolutely. So Pact as an organization has been around for 50 years, and we've been designing and implementing development projects across the world, anywhere from South America to Sub-Saharan Africa to Southeast Asia. The issue areas that we've generally focused on range from health, especially around HIV prevention and awareness, to financial inclusion, and helping folks create their own sustainable livelihoods, through to artisanal small-scale mining, a really large informal type of livelihood, but one of the most common in some of the developing parts of the world. And so I think the underlying current across all of those areas is the communities we work with tend to be very vulnerable and marginalized in some way. And so how can we engage them in the ecosystems in which they live and operate to help them become more heard, capable, and vibrant? Over the last few years, 50 years is a long period of history designing and implementing those programs. Over the last several years, our leadership team started asking questions like, is the way we're doing development sufficient to move the needle for the impact that we want to have? And I think there was a resounding chorus of not enough across the entire organization. With all the organizations I've been a part of throughout my career, it was very inspiring to see all the roles that fit into Pact, whether it's from the finance and accounting side to the programs teams to our country teams, all agreeing that we need to try to do something differently. In the spirit of what are the elements, the perspectives, the skills that we need to weave into our design of solutions and their implementation, through that conversation, up popped Pact Ventures. And so during that same time period, especially over the last 5 to 10 years, impact capital has just blown up incredibly, as I'm sure you're very well aware of. And so we as an NGO started asking questions like, we must have some type of role to play with that capital. And so Pact Ventures has been an exploration of what that answer could look like. And so my team now, we all actually come from the private sector. So a mix of skills from investment banking, private equity, strategy and management consulting to entrepreneurs. We're trying to bring all of those skills together under the context of how do we create more sustainable social solutions using a lot of the private sector skills that we've been able to cultivate in careers previously.
what Pact has done, you hit on so many of the key issues, but your staff gave me a couple of facts that really are quite impressive. And I just want to share this to put this in some perspective for everyone. But last year, you worked on 108 projects that resulted in more than 2.5 million people gaining access to better health and social services, nearly 1.2 million achieving a higher income, more than 430,000 benefiting from improved natural resource management, 150,000 citizens engaging in initiatives that resulted in positive state society engagement, 1,200 local organizations gaining capacity to more effectively serve their communities. I mean, it's really amazing scale, right? And so it's intriguing to see this new kind of, you described it, I think the word you used was experiment, to test, to figure out where Pact Ventures fits into all of this. But it is an interesting experiment and relevant, I think, to our audience, because there are people in the impact investing community who view traditional philanthropy and nonprofit work as failed, despite the fact that over my lifetime, we have reduced the population living in extreme poverty from 60% of the global population to less than 10%. Now, I will grant the naysayers that it isn't all due to the work of nonprofits, but simply the existence of 700 million extremely poor people on the planet is not evidence that the work that you have been doing at Pact is failing. But it is also true that impact investing and social entrepreneurship bring new opportunities, a new tool to this effort. And so it's intriguing to see how your process and your work is testing this potential synergy. What are the early indications? What is your thinking? How will this work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think just backing up to a couple of the stats that you mentioned, we're incredibly proud of our staff for being able to deliver that type of impact. I think what keeps us waking up hungry every morning, wanting to do more, is when you put that over the denominator of how large the problem really is. And to see, despite the absolute size of those numbers, how much more can and needs to be done for communities around the world. And so I think that's inspired a lot of the thinking around how do we tap into forces that we as a social sector organization, a development organization, have historically not really used, i.e. capital markets, i.e. market-based mechanisms. And how can we use that to then really scale the work even larger than what we have today? And so what Pact Ventures is trying to do is to step into that big messy pit, if you will, to try to figure it out. And so a few of the things that we've been thinking about, as I just reflect on, capital, and then this a development organization's role in that is, it's interesting that you had that framing of the private sector, private sector's view of foundations and nonprofits, and now that I'm on the inside of one, a lot of the language and underlying tones of what I hear the social sector say about the private sector, and so it's within the private sector, there was always this concept of, let's use the right type of capital for the right type of solution we need for a specific type of problem. I think what we've seen a lot in the social sector is, historically, there really was just one primary form of capital, and that was grants, right? And grants is one of the most risk-seeking, risk-taking types of capital. for the projects that we know work, right? We know the intervention, if you do X, Y will happen. For those, we're still using that very risky type of capital. What Ventures is trying to explore is, are there outcomes that intervention is creating beyond just the social element of it, in a way where can we tap that to be as a source of more sustainable financing? And if we can create that mechanism, then we no longer need to fund that thing that we know works with grants, right? And then we can be, from a macro perspective, be a lot more deliberate in using grants for the other types of interventions we actually need to test because we don't know. And so an example of that is in our financial inclusion program, we have a village savings and loans program that we call Worth. And so this is one where our staff will work with communities to help them form their own savings groups. So they're saving with each other and encouraging each other. They're then building on top of that to lend to each other. And this is something we've been doing for 20 years. And after the program ends, we'll come back a year or two later and the groups are still thriving, right? They're still saving with each other, still lending without our assistance. Well, we started thinking, well, what are some of the other outcomes that are created when people are saving and lending? And so what we started seeing was, well, when they lend, they have to repay. And so we're getting a sense of who has higher or more consistent repayment rates. We see them using the loans for productive uses or uses to grow their business. And so their incomes are increasing. And so we started asking questions of, well, who might be interested in some of those outcomes? And we actually started talking to a handful of different fintechs, small micro banks, and other financial institution types to say, hey, we have a program here that's historically been grant funded, but what it can do for you is we can, number one, identify or validate identities in people in very remote areas. Number two, provide some level of credit repayment data for you, not in the format that you're used to, but credit repayment nonetheless. And third, an infrastructure for distribution. Is this a service you would be interested in procuring? Right? And so now we've very quickly gone from a grant nonprofit type of program implementation into very quickly a B2B service procurement. And if we can use grant capital to tee up those types of solutions, the sustainability part of it comes when we're driving economic and business value to other stakeholders in the ecosystems in which we work. That's the broad thesis of Ventures. And we'll use different types of capital vehicles. We'll structure the financing differently to move risk away from people who don't want to take it to people who do want to take it.
So, Brian, as you look at that pool of capital, where does it come from? Is it just money off the Pact balance sheet, or have you financed this directly with limited partnership interests? Where does the money come from?
Great question. So right now it's all Pact's balance sheet. And so that allows us to be very nimble in the types of projects and pilots. Because I think, something with like a more classic LPGP structure, first of all, you have to convince folks that, what is the asset class? And then that requires you to really hyper specialize in doing that particular form. I think what the Ventures team is seeing right now is some of the projects that we're trying to cultivate do require equity because we don't know if there's going to be a source of repayment. Some of them require debt because we know there is a source of repayment, all the way through to hybrids, where we want to mix in grant-like capital, first loss guarantees, et cetera, along with more return-seeking capital. So coming off of the balance sheet allows us that flexibility to really think about the problem and then design the financing solution for that problem.
Brian, you've been at this for a while, and obviously Pact recruited you because you're brilliant. Uh, what is the most important lesson you've learned in your experience?
That's a good question. Stick with me on this. I would say it's English is not English, is not English. And so one of the, I've been very fortunate in my prior careers to have experienced really hardcore private sector experience, to have served incredible public sector clients, and to be a part of, whether on the outside or now inside, of social sector organizations. The way each one talks about the other, the way each one looks at the same exact problem, framing it differently, the way jargon is used to mean different things in different sectors, I think is a barrier that I've seen thematic with everybody I've worked with. And so we often mean the same thing, but are using different words, or we're saying the same words, but mean something different. And an example that, an experience that really hits close was, we were trying, as we try to finance some of our health-related interventions, we're seeing two groups of mindsets and language. One is the finance type that really gets deep into the vehicle repayments, all the credit statistics, et cetera. The other group are the MPHs, right? Your folks who are steeped in HIV research, literature, what works, what doesn't. When we bring a package like that to the finance folks, one of the analyses that we do is we try to link the social outcome with an economic value. And for the finance person, their universal language is accounting, but they have trouble underwriting the part where it's, well, if you do this social part, it will lead to this financial part. They can do the financial part all day. And then likewise on the social side, talking to our health experts, they know what to do to generate this, a particular health outcome. But going the next mile of saying, ascribing an economic value to it often rubs many the wrong way, right? Because it gets into what's the value of life type of questions. So I would say it's been trying to navigate those different languages that each sector and each approach speaks.
I know, I think I know what you're trying to say, having in my past life as an investment banker, when you had parties at the table and they both want to do a deal, and one party would articulate the proposal and the other person would articulate an acceptance of that proposal in slightly different words, and trying to navigate the tension between whether there was really agreement or only a pretense of agreement with an idea of negotiating details later, with some of those details being bigger than the anyway, yes.
Yeah.
It is, you can see how when you have a group of, as you say, the healthcare experts on the one side and the finance experts on the other side, trying to communicate, it would almost be like they weren't speaking the same language to one another.
Yeah.
Really important insight. Thank you very much for sharing that, Brian. Brian, before we go, what is your superpower?
Ooh, it's a humbling question. I think it would be translating English to English. I think being able to hear what the health person is saying, and knowing what of that is most important and relevant for the finance person, and vice versa, and then throw in government and the public sector into that mix. I think that's been one of the most enjoyable, hair-pulling, but enjoyable and most, I think, impactful breakththrough I've been to be a part of.
That is a great superpower. I'll call you when I need it next. So thank you. Brian, thank you very much for joining us today. Before you go, would you take just a minute and tell everyone how they can learn more about Pact Ventures and how they can connect with you personally?
Yes, absolutely. And so if you go to pactworld.org, Pact Ventures website is on there, where we have both introduction materials to who we are, how we think, what we do, and all of our contact information is there. We're also on Twitter and LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Well, Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us, and we wish you every success in solving all of the world's problems.
Thank you, Devin.
All righty, let's do some good.
At Caring Crowd, we believe everyone has the power to make a difference. Through our crowdfunding platform for community health, we empower passionate people to drive real change. Whether you work for a nonprofit organization, volunteer, or want to get involved for the first time, you can post a campaign on Caring Crowd. Join us, because caring is where change begins.
Thank you for listening. Devin Thorpe's mission is to end extreme poverty, improve global health, and mitigate climate change before 2045 by finding and sharing the stories of those who are doing the most good. You can join with other listeners to accelerate Devin's mission by visiting helpdevin.org right now.